Well, good morning, ladies of the Feminine Frequency group. I'm so happy to be here. And my talk is called Kintsugi Your Heart, the Art of Living with Grief. Now, did you know that 15% of psychiatric illnesses are attributed to unresolved grief? Let's see how we can talk about Kintsugi and help you to avoid becoming one of those stats. So today I'm going to take you on a journey from your grief-shattered heart to picking up the pieces to making something broken into something beautiful. My name's Carol Bannons. I am a certified grief educator and a grief coach, and I'm also a widow. My husband Brian died in 2018, and I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. I was totally not prepared. And of course, my heart shattered and I didn't think I'd ever heal. And yet here I am. And so let's talk about how we can kintsugi our heart. The issue is that we don't talk about grief. I mean, who wants to really? Really, we don't until we're in it. But we really do live in a grief-phobic society. One where we are expected to go back to work after 3 to 5 days. How can you possibly do that after you've lost somebody? You've barely prepared the funeral. And so we're expected to go back to work, we're expected to get back to normal, we're expected to keep calm and carry on. And frankly, that is just poor advice. These misconceptions about grief are things that we need to talk about. And so the beginning part of your kintsugi journey is to think about all these shattered pieces. How do we start to put them together again? So the very first step really is to give yourself permission to grieve. Society isn't going to, but you need to. You need to take the time to slow down, to really feel what's going on, to validate your loss. And it is challenging to do that when we're expected to get back to normal. And of course, normal is no longer normal. So give yourself permission to slow down. Grief is a whole body experience. I didn't realize this. I had never experienced the lethargy of grief, that exhaustion, and it's just hard to do stuff. So permission to grieve is really important. The second step of trying to kintsugi your heart, trying to pull those pieces together, is to openly mourn. Now, mourning is different to grieving. Mourning is the outward expression of our grief. How do we do that? Well, we cry, we wail, we punch a pillow. Perhaps we share stories of our loved one or look at photos. And again, it's very challenging to do that when the expectation around us is to hurry up, get back to normal, because we can't really deal with this. Grief makes people uncomfortable. They don't know what to do. You don't know what to do because nobody's ever talked about it. And so you think you have to keep going. I did this. It didn't work. I burned out after 3 years. I was a physical therapist for 37 years and I treated chronic pain patients, and I would go into their room and I went back to work 3 days after my husband's funeral. And I would have to put on this kind of facade of, yes, hello, I'm fine. And that meant that I had to push down all my grief just so that I could be present with others. And it was exhausting. That's why I burnt out. So this pushing down of emotions is one of the things that we're sort of encouraged to do because of the discomfort of those around us and our own self-judgment of, I should be doing this better. Oh, I'm sure, I'm doing it wrong. Other people seem to be okay. And so again, we just push, shove things down. And what happens is they sit there in your body and they can start causing all sorts of other issues, headaches, insomnia, aches and pains. And it took me years to realize this. So I want to share it with you. Please start mourning, start feeling the pain. It's absolutely valid. And the thing is, when we push it away, it feels like our loved one's life has been invalidated, that your grief has been invalidated. So step 3, as we're trying to kintsugi our heart, as we're trying to pull things together, is to think about ways of honoring our loved ones' lives. Now, in early grief, that can be really challenging. You're just trying to get through each day. But as you progress, as you do the grief work, can you think of ways that somehow honor the life of your loved one? You know, when Brian died, he was a jazz pianist. We'd recorded his very last concert, and I made a CD to share with his friends and family and fans. And it was really a beautiful gift that I could give to share him a little more, and it really honored him. Now, I know everybody can't do that. And with the holiday season coming up, it is particularly a difficult time for people in grief. So maybe you light a candle for your loved one. Maybe you make a favorite recipe. Maybe you put an ornament on the tree if you celebrate Christmas. But little ways, and the reason this is important is that it keeps that connection with our loved ones. Now, I know in this group we're all a spiritual bunch, so we feel that we can continue that spiritual connection. I certainly do. And I think that as we allow ourselves to go back and pick cherished memories, they're like the glue that starts to pull these pieces together. You know, when we have a scar from something, it's like a scar of life. You can have little bits of your loved one there cementing the pieces of your heart together. They'll always be there. And so it's important to start thinking about that. Now, as we start to pull those pieces, and you can imagine we've got this shattered heart, we're pulling the pieces together. We want to start acknowledging and integrating everything that's going on. And this is really important to understand. There is no timeline in grief, and it will take people different amounts of time. The reason it takes different amounts of time is because we all have different experiences, past experiences with grief, different relationships with the person we've lost, different support, our own mental health, so many differences. So I do want to just pop in here and say, don't compare your grief with somebody else. Your loss is the worst loss, as my mentor David Kessler says. And so we want to come to this place of acceptance. And it is a bitter pill to swallow that you are no longer going to see that person you loved. And it does take time for your brain and your heart and your nervous system to come to that conclusion, to realize actually they're not coming back. But as we get into that position of acceptance, we can also move towards gratitude. And I think gratitude is really another part of the glue that's going to hold your heart together. Gratitude for what? Early grief is pretty tough. It's like, what's the point? You're just trying to get through the day. I know, I lived it. I didn't want to think about gratitude, but luckily I had a gratitude practice, and I always did do gratitude, and I'd sit there and think, what am I grateful for? It might have been my coffee or the smile of somebody. It was small little things. And as you add little drops of gratitude into your grief, it is very healing. It really is, if you can just search things to be appreciative for. And as you do that, you are bringing this heart together. You are starting to make something broken back into something beautiful. But now it's all about you. Who are you without them? It was always we, Brian and Carol, Carol and Brian, a couple. And all of a sudden it feels like you've been amputated, you've lost half of yourself. Who are you without that other person? What's your role? This is where deep grief work really begins. It's uncomfortable, it's difficult, it takes longer than you think, and you have to be open to going there. You really do, to sit with the emotions and just quieten down and figure out what's next for you. And that's where support comes in. It's really important to have the right people around you, because most people are going to say, aren't you over it yet? Somebody said that to me at 6 months, and I'm like, no. So rediscovering who you are and who you want to be, how important is that? And how difficult is that? It really is. And as we're doing that, we go deep into ourselves, we allow these emotions, and we can choose. And choose can be a difficult word to hear in grief. We didn't choose to lose our loved one. We didn't choose when they died, how they died, any of that. We're not going to choose that about ourselves. But grief is made up of many, many choices. Initially, it's the choice of getting out of bed. Are you going to get out of bed today, or are you going to pull the covers over your head and disappear? I mean, that's what you want to do. You don't ever want to get out of bed and face the world. And yet at some point you do. Maybe the next choice is, you know what, I'm going to have a shower and get out of my pajamas. Maybe week 2, you actually allow a friend to come round for a cup of tea. These are, I think, like small acts of courage when you're in grief, these little steps. But as we move through this Kintsugi journey, we come to this space where we have to choose what we want to do for the rest of our life, because we are blessed to still have a life. And so the choice is, do I do the work to move forward and carry my grief with me? Because grief comes with you. You don't heal from it. You don't get over it. It comes as a companion with you, but it doesn't have to define you. Or do you choose to stay stuck in the wilderness of grief because you're just hoping that time will heal all wounds, which it doesn't. We do need to do this work. So it is a choice. It's hard to hear, but I think we have a choice of what next? What are we going to do with our lives as we move forward? And so I want to read you a poem. I wrote a book, and it came really from my heart, and it wasn't really early on. It was this year when I finally realized, oh, I still have all these emotions stuck inside that I haven't dealt with. And who knew that I could write poetry? Because I certainly didn't. And out it poured. And it was actually one of the most healing things I could do to heal my heart. So this poem is called Kintsugi, Your Heart with Love, and I'm going to share it with you. I'm just going to read it because I don't know it off by heart. So, Kintsugi, your heart with love. Your heart shattered into a million pieces, crushed by the weight of grief. You can't even imagine patching it up, becoming whole again. And yet, it can be done, piece by little piece, gently, tenderly, lovingly. The Japanese art of Kintsugi is putting broken pieces of pottery back together with glistening liquid gold. A beautiful way to restore something damaged. Could you imagine using the same principle to mend your broken heart, gently joining each piece, not with gold, but love? As you do the grief work of learning to come back to love, despite the pain, finding acceptance in where you are now, you can discover that your heart can be whole in its put-together state, because despite the obvious fault lines, there is still beauty in its imperfection. Now, it's whole, but different. And I think that is that's why Kintsugi is such a beautiful analogy for grief. You take something broken, you're broken by grief, and you can put it together and be whole and still carry the grief. But along with the grief, you carry the love for your loved one. You don't have to just have one or the other. And so if you're a griever, I want to remind you of this. You have permission to grieve, to slow down, to take your time. You must allow yourself to feel, to heal. You have to feel those emotions. It is not embarrassing. It is not shameful. Don't judge yourself. Give yourself self-compassion. Feel the emotions. Figure out ways that you want to honor and remember the life of your loved one. Remember, these are parts of the glue that are going to bring your heart back together. Come to a place where you're in a gentle, difficult state of acceptance, perhaps, but finding gratitude again, adding glue to that heart. And then start looking at the future you, the different you, the different normal, the different life, the life that you didn't perhaps choose, but the life that still has hope for being possibly beautiful even. And I know it doesn't feel like it early on. I know. I'm at 5.5 years. It wasn't until 4 years that I felt like Carol again. It's a long time. In fact, the one statistic, another statistic for you, is that it takes 5 to 8 years to get, I'm not going to say get over, but to deal with a significant loss. That is a long time. And so with that, I want to say to people who are supporting grievers that if they don't seem back to normal, they're not. It may take longer or shorter than you think. Don't compare their grief to somebody down the road who also lost maybe a husband and they seem to be fine at 6 months. Don't try and fix them. Grief is not to be fixed. It is to be experienced in all its uncomfortableness, in all its pain. And we have to do that. Otherwise it comes back at a later date to really affect you, hence that unresolved grief. And if somebody has a grief burst where they have a wave of grief and tears, allow them that space, hold the space for them, even if it's at 3 years. And remember, because grief does travel with people, it may be a little thing that will trigger them or activate them into tears or a feeling of sorrow, even many years later. So I hope this has helped you understand that grief is challenging. It's harder than we think, takes longer than we think, and it stays with us. And yet we can move from that broken, shattered heart to making it into something beautiful. And in the description here, I have put a link. You can go and download an Ease Your Grief Burst meditation free. So please go ahead and do that. And please reach out and message me if you'd like to know more about my book or if you're in grief and you need support. But remember, you can go on that Kintsugi journey, but it takes the grief work. So I hope this is helpful for any of you in grief or even those of you supporting someone in grief. And I wish you a very happy holiday season.